Today we discuss the idea of capital. Now, you may have learned in economics class that capital means money or wealth. What I want to argue to you today is that capital is really a mechanism to extract energy from you. Okay? And what's important to understand is that in a universe where consciousness is the universe, then what energy is ultimately is attention and focus. Okay? So it's not enough for you to work at something, you also have to concentrate on it in order for capital to extract energy from you. Okay? All right. So with this in mind, let's discuss an example. All right? Okay. So the most basic example is you have a landlord class, and they're trying to extract energy from the peasant class. Okay? Now, before, traditionally, we've understood energy as maybe grain. Okay? Grain. Capital. But the problem with this is you're actually not that extracting that much energy from the peasant because it's not that hard to grow grain. Also, grain can be stored. Okay? So, in other words, as a landlord, your priority is not necessarily just to extract rent from the peasant. Your priority is somehow to get the peasant to focus entirely on the task at hand. And to do that, over the centuries, landlords have figured out certain ways or certain mechanisms in order to extract the most value from the peasant class. Okay? So let's discuss the mechanisms. The first is that we've transitioned from slavery to freedom. Okay? If you really want to extract value, if you really want to extract energy and attention and focus, it's much better to give peasants the illusion of freedom rather than just enslave them. Okay? So give peasants the belief that they have control over their lives. Another way of saying freedom is equity, right? Equity. So think of a company where I might give you some equity and then you work a lot harder because you think you can make more money. Okay, so this is a first trick that we've learned over the centuries. The second trick is to make capital more abstract. Okay? So the abstraction of capital. So let's use an example. Okay, grain was initially capital. The problem with grain is that you only need so much. So as a peasant, you only want to work as much as necessary in order to grow grain to feed your family. And maybe a little bit more to save. But most of the time, you just want to enjoy your life. But then we transition to gold, right? And gold, yeah, people are more greedy. But the problem with gold is there's only a finite amount of it. All right? It's hard to locate. So only a minority would expend all their energy trying to locate gold. Okay? And now what we've done is we've transitioned to the idea of money. Okay? As I will show you, the great innovation of the past 100 years is to convince people that money is God. Money is both nothing and everything. And so you can spend your entire life dedicated to achieving money. Okay? So that's the second great innovation. And the third great technique that's changed economics is to understand that if you really want people to focus their energies, you need to create anxiety in them. Okay? Anxiety. And how do you create anxiety? Well, the best way is to create the idea of debt, right? So I'll lend you $1 million today, and you enjoy it, but then you have to spend the rest of the time paying it back. The problem with this, of course, is that there's interest, and so you can never really pay it back, which causes anxiety. And so the idea of debt, I can extract much more value from you than if you were not in debt. Okay? That's the first tool. Second is the idea of inequality and poverty, where a certain class of people are poor, and they'll always be poor. And that incentivizes, encourages the middle class to work even harder. All right? The third mechanism of anxiety is wealth destruction. What is wealth destruction? Simple. War or depression, right? When the economy collapses, when all your wealth vanishes. The idea here is, listen, if the peasants work really hard and they store up a lot of grain, they have a huge granary, they really don't have to work anymore, right? So as a landlord, what do? Well, you go burn down the granary. All right? So war is not just a mechanism to expand capitalism, but it's also a way to make people more anxious because you destroy their wealth and therefore they have to work a lot harder. Okay? So again, in economics class, you may taught that the point of capitalism is to accumulate more capital. No, guys. The point of capitalism is to focus the energies of the peasants. Okay? Because the attention, the focus, is what makes society much more energetic. And that's the end goal. All right? So if society is wealthy, that's actually a good thing because it makes people lazy and complacent. And so the way to resolve this issue is by constantly engaging in wars and by having the boom-bust cycle that you might learn in economics class, right? So in economics, you might learn that the boom-bust cycle is natural to capitalism. It is not natural to capitalism. It is artificial. The people in charge artificially destroy economies, to destroy wealth, to make the peasants work a lot harder. Okay? So are you guys following along? Okay? So that's the strategy that we've learned these past few centuries. And that's why in today's society, we are the wealthiest society ever in human history, and yet at the same time, we are the most miserable, we are the most anxious, and we are the most in debt, okay? Because the landlord class, the capitalists, the elite, what they figured out are three mechanisms in which to extract as much energy from us as possible. First is to give us the illusion that we have freedom in our lives, we have the freedom of choice, that we have equity in society. We can vote for our leaders. When in reality, it's all just an illusion. Okay? Second is to make money God, the end-all and be-all, both nothing and everything, the very focus of your life. And because money is so abstract, you can spend your entire life trying to achieve more and more of it, and yet at the same time, achieve nothing and nothing, okay? So think of like someone like Jack Ma, who has like more money than he can possibly spend, and what does he want? He wants more money, okay? And the third is to create anxiety in society so that people's entire existence is one of stress. And as a result, people are much more focused on work and wealth creation. Okay? And you do that by a constant process of wealth destruction. All right? So, but the problem, of course, is that when you push people too hard, when it becomes so obvious you explain people, then people will eventually revolt against you. So the solution that we figured out is, what we can do is we can actually move, okay? The landlord class can actually move somewhere else. And so when the anxiety becomes overwhelming, what will happen is the peasants will destroy each other, and the landlord moves somewhere else to the capital, and they'll come back when the peasant class have completely exhausted themselves, and they're willing to rebuild society, okay? And this process is what rules the world today. It is what we call transnational capital. In other words, the wealthy people of the world, they have absolutely no loyalty to nation or to people or to place. They only have loyalty to their capital. And they're willing to move to wherever they can, wherever they have to, in order to keep their capital safe and to grow it. And that's why a lot of people today are moving to Dubai or Hong Kong or Singapore. They don't care. They may not be of that place, but they'll go wherever they need to in order to pay less taxes, in order to avoid the social conflict created by their policies, okay, in order to find better investment opportunities. And this system is what rules the world today. But then the question is, okay, in concrete terms, what really is transnational capital? What allows transnational capital to function, to be able to move from place to place? Because remember, when you move from place to place, there are a lot of costs involved. For example, you don't really know anyone there, and so how can you trust the people? Right? And the solution that we've developed over the centuries is the idea of secret societies. So what you will learn is that secret societies and transnational capital are essentially the same thing, okay? And this is the force that rules the world today. All right, so now that I've discussed transnational capital, let's look at secret societies, like where they come from and how they work. Okay, well, secret societies exist because the landlord class and the peasant class are fundamentally different. Therefore, the motivations, the beliefs, the worldview of these two classes must be different. Okay, so the peasants, what do peasants want? They want to live a simple life. They want to make some money. They want to have a family. They want to have some fun. They want to believe in God, okay? And so for the peasant class, we have organized religion, whether it's Islam or Christianity. Okay, Christianity. Jesus, right? Jesus tells you to be a good person. Confucius tells you to be a good person, right? But the landlord class, they're different. They have a responsibility, they have an obligation to control the peasant class and extract as much energy as possible in order to maintain their society. Okay? So their religious practices must be very different. So whereas the peasants can pray to God, the landlord class must fundamentally pray to Satan. Okay? So now let's look at why the landlord class must pray to Satan. And this is true for all societies throughout human history. Before, the landlord class was blatant about it, okay? Now they have to be more hypocritical, more secretive about it. All right, so let's look at the landlord class. All right, so to be a landlord class, to be the elite, you have to do terrible things. But it's actually hard to do terrible things. All right, so let me give you an example. Let's just say, I would say to you, all right, I'm gonna give you 10 million US dollars. But what you need to do is this. What you need to do is take a gun and late at night, go kill a random stranger. You think, wow, that's a really good deal. If I kill a random stranger late at night, no one's gonna know I did it, and I walk away with $10 million. And you think that I can do it, but guess what? When I actually make you go do it, you actually can't do it. Because there are lots of restrictions on your behavior, okay? So think of suicide. If I gave you $100 million and promised you a path to heaven, would you kill yourself? Probably not, okay? So suicide, killing yourself, in many ways, it's no different from killing someone else. We can't do it, okay? But there are actually hacks around this. We figured out ways to make you go kill someone in a way that doesn't make you feel that guilty about it, okay? So to understand why, I will introduce you two social science experiments that they conducted in America at the end of the 20th century, okay? The first is something called the Milgram experiment. And this was done at Yale by a psychologist named Stanley Milgram. And the experiment was very simple. What he would do is he would set up an actor, okay, this is an actor, okay, or what we call Confederate. And the person would be hooked up to an electric chair, right? And there'd be a buzzer, which increases the voltage in that electric chair, okay? And there's like a max and there's a min, okay? And suddenly, Milgram would be here in his lab coat, and he would invite a participant, okay, who's essentially a student, to come and be an assistant, okay? And the assistant's job was to press the button. And suddenly Milgram wanted to know, first of all, would this volunteer, this assistant, agree to shock another human being, even though he's seen the human being in pain? And second of all, suddenly Milgram wanted to see how much pain the volunteer was willing to inflict. And it turned out that with the idea of authority, okay, people are much more willing to let go of their inhibitions. Because what you're doing is you are removing responsibility from yourself to someone else. I didn't do it, I was ordered to do it. And surprisingly, people are willing to inflict a lot of pain on other people because they are able to remove responsibility for their individual actions, okay? Right, does that make sense? So the point of secret society is for people to come together and avoid taking responsibility for their actions. How? By praying to another god, right? By saying, we didn't do this, we didn't go start this war, we didn't destroy the economy, it was Satan that told us to do it. We had a meeting with Satan, we did the rituals, we summoned Satan, and Satan says, for the good of the world, you must be evil. You must go and start this war so that we can create paradise on earth. It wasn't us. It was not us. It was Satan who did this. Okay? That's the point of a secret society. To force yourself to believe that you have no agency in this world. And you are controlled by Satan, okay, or another god, Saturn. Okay, so it's very common for these secret societies to believe in a god called Saturn. Who is Saturn? Saturn, the Greek is Cronus. And Cronus is a god of time. Cronus is a god of time and order and structure. And Cronus would do things that were unconscionable, that were inhumane in order to maintain control of the world, including in his own children. Because then his children could not rebel against him, okay? So they pray to Saturn to look for that divine energy in order to maintain order and control in the world for the good of others, okay? Not for the good of me, but for the good of others. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the first idea I need you to understand about these secret societies. They always pray to a higher God. They believe in interdimensional lizard people, or they believe in Satan, or they believe in Saturn. Who cares, okay? But they don't feel as though they're in control. They feel as though they're possessed by demons or by extraterrestrials, okay? And why? In order to do what they must to maintain their power and their wealth. Okay, that's number one. Number two is this. Another experiment that you guys might have heard of, something called the Solomon-Asch experiment. Okay. And here, the experiment is 10 people in a room. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and they all sit together. And they're just asked to tell me if this is a straight line or a circle. Okay? It's that simple. Then what happens is a volunteer is asked to come into the room, okay? And this volunteer goes last. And everyone around the room goes and tells the answer, okay? And from 1 to 10, okay, and these are all Confederates, okay? These are all part of the conspiracy. From 1 to 10, they all say this is a circle. And so by the time you get to the volunteer, who's number 11, he's like, what should I say? And often, a lot of times is, he'll say, it's a circle, because he's trying to conform to the group. But not only that, afterwards, when he's told that, oh, there's actually a line, he's actually convinced he saw a circle. Okay? That's the power of group conformity. Okay. So two ideas, authority and conformity is what underlies the power of secret societies. And as such, you are now, because you are part of the secret society, you now have the power to take a gun, go kill someone late at night, and collect your $10 million. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right. And again, every society does this because often when you're part of the landlord class, the elite, the transnational capitalists, you have to do things against your own wiring, okay? Your own psychology. And that's why secret societies exist. All right. Now, sometimes secret societies are forced to do really bad things because they're often in competition with each other. And in this competition, it's always a question of like, who's more evil, okay? So what they figured out is this. They figured out how to structure the secret societies, okay? This hierarchy. Sorry, hierarchy. Okay, so these are the people at the top, the landlords. And these are basically the initiates, okay? The people who want to join. But they are ignorant about the true purpose of the secret society. So the question then is, how do you maintain this hierarchy? And what they figure out is something really, really simple, all right? It's really simple human psychology. Throughout human history, what was very common was for groups of young men, okay, they've been discarded by their families because the families don't have enough to eat, so they get together and they form like wolf packs. They go around, and what they really want is a wife. Okay, that's what they really want. More than food, they want a wife. So what they're forced to do is go as a group, as a gang, go to a village and kidnap a woman and kill the family, okay? And this is a very common thing in human history. And let's try to figure out the psychology of what's going on. Okay, so you have like 5 guys. This is just a thought experiment, okay? 5 guys, young guys. And they're gonna go to a village where there's a family, okay? A husband, a wife, and 2 kids. What they're gonna do, of course, is they're obviously gonna kill the husband, and they're also gonna kill the 2 children, okay? And they're gonna kidnap the wife. Now let me ask you this question. Let's understand the psychology of this woman when her entire life is destroyed, okay? Does she, A, want vengeance? B, become depressed? C, fall in love with one of the guys? A, B, or C, guys? A, B, or C? Yeah. What is that? A. Okay. You guys would think she would want vengeance for what has happened, but that's not what happens, okay? It's more likely that she becomes depressed or she falls in love. It's often at times that she falls in love. We call this a Stockholm syndrome. All right, it's a very basic human psychology that is consistent throughout human history, throughout all societies. When a woman sees her entire life collapse like that, she has no longer any stability. Her reality is destroyed. And therefore, she clings to anyone who is willing to support her, even though that person is the same person who destroyed her life in the first place. It's really weird psychology, but it's very, very true. That's also why arranged marriages work, okay? Throughout human society, older man is often paired with a younger wife. She might be like 14 or 13. But, after a few years, they do fall in love with each other because the woman is completely dependent on the man. Okay, and also that physical intimacy. All right, so it sounds really depressing, but this is a very basic principle of human psychology. Because at this point in history, when her reality has collapsed, her soul has left her, okay? And now she's basically a slave. And what a slave does is someone who clings to life. All right, does that make sense? Okay. Now, what happens to these 5 guys, okay? A, do they feel guilty for what they do? B, do they fight over the woman? Or C, are they brothers forever? The obvious answer is C, right? They're brothers forever, okay? So even though they've committed this terrible, terrible act, right, it's made them more unified, okay? And this is a structure of secret societies. The strategy of secret societies is for the people at the very top to commit these rituals of torture in order to turn the initiates into slaves. And those who are most willing to participate in these rituals, those who are most willing to become slaves, become the middle people, okay? The people that are most trusted, because now they're slaves. And that's how secret societies work. And that's why there are so many different degrees to secret societies. And that's why at the very top, no one knows what they're really doing. What they're really doing is praying to Satan, okay? Because Satan is giving them the strength, or Saturn, who knows, okay? Or whatever. Saturn or Satan is giving them the strength in order to torture these initiates, so these initiates become their slaves for life. And then these initiates are given limitless wealth and power because they are now completely loyal, dependent on the master. All right? All right. All right. This sounds confusing, but let's use another example. All right. So Spartans. Sparta. So Sparta, remember, Sparta is a war society, a militaristic society that is intent on maintaining control over its slaves, okay, the Helots. And the Helots outnumber the Spartans 10-1. So these Spartans need to be really cohesive as a society. They need to fight and die for each other. So their education system is like this. At 5 or 6, the Spartan child is taken away from the parents, okay? And this obviously creates fear and anxiety. All right? Also, what happens is the child is in school beaten up by the older kids. And this creates trauma. All right? Another word we use for this is intergenerational trauma, because the Spartans do this to every child, intergenerational trauma. All right, so the kid at this point is unsafe, insecure. His mind is really screwed up. And then when he's most vulnerable, maybe when he's 11 or 12, what happens now is he's paired with an older man who's like 29 or 30. Okay, an older man. And this older man, they become lovers. Basically what happens is the man first, of course, commits, sexual abuse. But again, because the child is traumatized, because the child has no bearings, no reality, doesn't believe anyone in this world loves him, even though the man is being abusive to him, he falls in love with the man. And as a result, the boy will do anything that the man orders to him to, okay? So what happens is this man becomes his general, and he becomes a soldier or an officer. And that's why the Spartans are so fearless. Okay, because the soldiers are completely loyal to the generals because they were once lovers. The soldier feels as though this general, who I must obey, he saved my life when I most needed it, when my parents abandoned me, when I was being beat up every day, when I felt complete insecurity, when I was traumatized. He came and he gave me a home, and therefore I must die for him. Okay? And guys, look, listen, this sounds weird, but if you go to the inner city gangs in America or anywhere in the world, okay, these drug cartels in Mexico, they use the same principles as the Spartans. Okay, these young boys, 13, 14, they have no fathers. They're put in a gang, they're abused, and then the gang leader treats them well. They might have some, sex, and then these boys are completely loyal to the gang leaders. Same thing if you go to these child armies in Africa. Okay, very basic principle that every human understands. If you abuse a child and then be nice to that child is obedient to you forever. This is how secret societies behave. Okay, one last example. Okay, so in history, there was a very famous secret society called the Assassins. You may have played the video game Assassin's Creed, okay? Why are they called assassins? Because of the word hashish. Hashish is a drug like marijuana, right? It's a hallucinogen. Okay? So the way these societies would work is if you're a new member, I would make you have hashes, okay? Hashes. And your mind would become blurry. You feel as though you're in a dream. And then what would happen is I put you in a room, and you're basically like drunk, okay? And then these young men would come and pleasure you. And then you would wake up in your home, and you would think this was a dream, okay? And your master would tell you, this is what paradise is like. All right? This is what heaven is like. If you do what I tell you, I guarantee you, you will go to heaven where 10,000 virgins will pleasure you for all of eternity. Okay? And this turns these assassins into the most dedicated killers. Again, I keep on saying this. It's really hard to convince someone to go kill another person. But these assassins are willing to do whatever it takes in order to enter paradise. Okay? So, guys, this combination, sex plus trauma plus hallucinogens or hallucinogens, psychedelics, okay? These three things, psychedelics, drugs, sex plus trauma, they create the perfect slaves, okay? Slaves. Because now what you can do is you can take these slaves and then have them infiltrate other secret societies. They become the perfect spies because they are forever loyal to you, okay? They're completely emotionally dependent on you, and they will do what it takes in order to please you. But you have to like train them from an early age, okay? And this is how these secret societies, they fight each other. They recruit an army of young kids. They traumatize, brutalize these kids to train them to be spies, to be killers, and then they will unleash these kids on other secret societies and their enemies as well, like the assassins did, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, you have a question?
So, like, for the woman, like, her families are being killed, like, won't she remember, like, who has killed all her families, but just have relied on that murder because he's
Yeah, I understand the question. Okay, it's a good question, okay? The answer is this. In psychology, what you learn is that when you're traumatized, what happens to you? What happens to you? You're not there. The word is disassociation, okay? You're not there, you don't remember anything because your mind will explode or your system would collapse if you actually remember in detail what happened. So your mind disassociates. You're not there. You don't remember anything. Okay? That's why trauma is so effective. Because not only do you become obedient and dependent on the person traumatizing you, but at the same time, you actually don't remember this association. Okay? So the person who really controls you, you forget. Your handler, okay? Your handler is someone that is at the back of your mind. But even if you don't know that person, what happens if that person comes before you and tells you what to do, you obey. Okay? It's almost as though the handler has programmed you, and only he knows the password. So this is what we call programming. And this is what they did with MK Ultra. Okay? MK Ultra, MK Monarch. Okay? But it's a very common thing. We've been doing this for thousands of years in every single society because it works and it's easy and it's effective. Okay? Right? Does that make sense? All right. All right, so let's talk about the development of transnational capital. All right? So there have been 4 distinct stages. Let's look at them. These 4 distinct stages are Venice, Dutch Republic, England, and what's the last one, guys? Come on. America, right? Okay. So these 4 places are special because they are all merchant oligarchies. Okay? Merchant oligarchies. Meaning that they are controlled by private interests. private interest. Now, I understand that in school you're taught that America's a democracy and England's a democracy and all that. No, guys, it's all nonsense. These are oligarchies. They're controlled by private interests. They've always been controlled by private interests. They're still controlled by private interests today. Okay? And the way that these private interests, what they do to maintain control over their people and the world is through three mechanisms, okay? The first is banking. Banking just means that these oligarchs are pooling their resources together in order to extract energy from the world. Now, the thing about banking that's very important is that if you're able to bank in a certain way, you're able to extract energy across time and space, right? You're able to borrow money from the future and spend it today. Does that make sense? Okay, and this will happen with the abstraction of capital. All right, so banking is basically extract time and space. You're extracting energy from across time and space. Okay, I'll explain more as we go along. Okay. Second is the idea of a navy, where you're controlling trade. And the third is diplomacy. The idea of diplomacy is you don't want to fight wars because your population is very limited. What you want to do is trick other people into fighting wars for you. Okay? You want to have these trade negotiations. So it's like spying, intelligence. All right? And then all four, what's really important is that if you're a merchant oligarchy, you're actually controlled by a secret society. Okay? Not a king, but by a secret society. Because otherwise, how else can these merchants get along with each other, okay? So secret societies is what allows them to work together to plan and control their populations. Now, what's going to happen is this. Venice is one of the early oligarchies, but with each iteration, it's going to improve in power. Why? Because by the time we get from Venice to England and the Dutch Republic, we have something called the Protestant Reformation. Okay? So what I will do is explain to you what the Protestant Reformation is. But the Protestant Reformation radically changes how we see ourselves and our relationship with God, which makes transnational capital much more powerful. And then what's going to happen is, by the time we hit England, we go from England to America, we have the Enlightenment. Okay? And when we hit the Enlightenment, what's going to happen is, by getting rid of God, we turn money into God. And when this happens, transnational capital becomes all-powerful. All right? So, remember what's happening is we have Venice, then the Dutch Republic becomes more powerful than Venice because it adopts the ideas of Protestant Reformation. And then America becomes more powerful than England because it adopts the ideas of the Enlightenment. What's happening throughout this process is transnational capital is becoming much more abstract and therefore much more powerful. Okay, and therefore much more capable of extracting energy from the population. All right, so let's go over the Protestant Reformation. All right. The Catholics and the Protestants. So there are three major differences between the Catholics and the Protestants. Okay. So the Catholics have three basic ideas, right? There's orthodoxy, there's hierarchy, and there's justification by works. All right? So the idea is, hey, if you want to go to heaven, just obey the Catholic Church, what the priest tells you. Don't think, just do what the priest tells you to do. Really simple, right? Okay, but there are three problems with all this, okay? The first problem is God becomes distant from you, okay? You're not allowed to communicate with God. And as I keep on saying in this class, we humans are first and foremost religious. We want to be spiritual. We want to have communion with God. But the Catholic Church says, no, you have to just obey us, okay? You have to obey our dogma, even though our dogma doesn't really make much sense. Okay? The idea of hierarchy, of course, leads to corruption, where the priests can do whatever they want because they're in power, okay? And they become extremely wealthy and powerful. And the third problem, just justification by works, is it leads to hypocrisy. You can be the worst person in the world, but hey, as long as you give enough money to the Catholic Church, you go to heaven, guys, okay? All right? So that's why the Protestants hated the Catholic Church. And so they proposed a new system. All right? The new system is, first of all, direct access. You don't have to go through the priest anymore. You don't have to listen to the dogma of the church. You can just actually communicate with the God directly through the Bible. Okay? Second idea is egalitarian, where there is no longer any hierarchy. You can communicate with God directly. Okay? And the third idea is justification by faith. Okay. The problem, though, of course, is that these three solutions to the Catholic problem will create more problems. Okay? The first is the idea of direct access. So you can access God directly. The problem is that Christians believe in the Holy Trinity. Okay, the Holy Trinity, right? God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are different but the same. Okay? Separate but co-equal. It makes no sense whatsoever. And as such, if you're trying to access yourself, you can't do it because this precludes you, okay? It is impossible for you to insert yourself into the story of the Holy Trinity. If it was just Jesus, you could talk to Jesus, but how do you talk to Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit at the same time? You can't do it, okay? So this causes confusion, okay? Second problem is the idea of egalitarian. This causes just so much chaos, debate and chaos, right? Because now, hey, if I want to, I can start my own religion. I don't need to get people to agree with me. I need to start my own religion and have followers follow me, okay? So this causes a lot of debate within the Protestant religion. It still happens today where among the Protestants, there are like thousands and thousands of different branches, okay? The last problem is most problematic. Justification by faith. This creates anxiety, right? Because if you don't really know God because of the Holy Trinity, how do you know you really believe in God? Right? The Catholics believe that all you do is give some money, do some good work, don't sin, and you go to heaven. But the Protestants believe that, no, you have to really believe in God in order to go to heaven. Okay? What's even worse is that another reformer named John Calvin, he proposed the idea of double predestination. Because the Catholic Church says, you know what? Only we can decide who goes to heaven, so if you disobey us, you'll burn in hell. And John Calvin, to respond to this, says, no, no, no. The Catholic Church has no power over anyone because God, at the beginning of time, has already decided who will go to heaven and who will go to hell, okay? Double predestination. It's already been decided, guys. And how do you know? Well, the solution is through energy, right? If you work hard, and you make a lot of money, you become very wealthy, then you know that God favors you. But after you become very wealthy, what's really important is for you to understand you can't spend any of this money because you can't sin. Okay? So you can only invest the money. All right? As you can understand, the merchant oligarchies love this because now they're taking people's money and they're able to invest it in any way they want. It's all going to the bank. Okay? And this is the Dutch Republic. This creates the Dutch Republic, which becomes the wealthy society in Europe at this time, in the 17th century. Okay? All right? Any questions so far? Okay? So what's going to happen, though, is by the time you go from England to America, okay, England's also Protestant. The Protestant Reformation is going to change to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is, there may be a God, but God doesn't really interfere in the universe. God lets us do whatever we want. Okay, so it's up to us to create our own world. So now that God has left, what happens is you need something to replace the God, right? This becomes money, okay? Money as God. And this works because if you insert money into the Protestant faith, it solves a lot of problems. It solves a problem of anxiety, because how do you know you go to heaven? If you become very wealthy. Okay? And everyone, how do you know you're favored by God? Whoever becomes the wealthiest. Okay? So money becomes the new religion of America. And this is what ultimately leads to the triumph of transnational capitalism. Okay? All right. Okay, so how do we get from the Dutch Republic to England? Okay, the answer is very simple. The problem is that the Dutch Republic, it is on the continent of Europe. Therefore, it's very easy to invade. Now you have a problem, like how do you keep your money safe from invaders, okay? Because they have a lot of gold. And so what they will do is they will take this money, and in 1688, they will transfer most of this money to England, okay? So how does England convince the Dutch to invest in England? Well, first thing is they make a Dutch aristocrat, William of Orange, the king of England, okay? All right? 1688, England invites William of Orange to become the king of England. That's number one. Number two is the Bank of England is set up in 1694. What makes the Bank of England special is that it is a private bank that is guaranteed by Parliament. Okay, does that make sense, guys? What this means is this. What this means is that if I make a lot of money, I keep it. But if I lose my money, the people will ensure that I get it back. Okay? Now what's going to happen is the Bank of England will lend money to England to fight wars. Remember, the Bank of England, what it is, it's transnational capital. So it's private interest, but anyone can invest it, including the Dutch Republic, including, guess what? The Catholic Church. Okay? And the third thing is secret societies. So what's going to happen is that secret societies are going to create these linkages among these different transnational capital groups in order to allow them to work together, okay? All right? So does it make sense? And what's really important is this system will transfer over to America, creating a system that we have today. The Bank of England becomes the Federal Reserve. Secret societies transfer over. These are the Freemasons, okay? All right? Does it make sense, guys? And this is why we have the system that we have today. The thing that you need to understand about the Federal Reserve is the Federal Reserve was set up in like 1913 or 14, I can't remember, okay? But the Federal Reserve, what they can do is print money. It's a private bank. It's private interest. They print money, and the government, how's the government spend money? It borrows from the Federal Reserve at interest. Okay, so the people are borrowing from the bankers. And so that's why America is controlled by private interests. Right? Clear? And that's why transnational capital controls America and the world. Any questions? All right, so let's go over the PPT, okay? All right, so Venice. What makes Venice special is after Rome collapses, the Roman Empire collapses, right? These noble families, they're now impoverished. They go to different places. The city that becomes dominant in the Italian peninsula is actually Venice. Why? Because it's surrounded by marshes. So it's hard to invade. And you don't actually want to invade it because it has no resources. Its only advantage is that it's by the coast, which allows it to engage in piracy, as well as trade and diplomacy, okay? All right, so this is Venice today. And as you can see, it would be very hard to invade. Also, remember at this time, it's very poor, so no one wants to invade it. All right, another picture. Pretty beautiful, right? You guys should go before it sinks, okay? If you want to go visit Venice, do it now before it sinks. All right, so again, Venice, it's a merchant oligarchy, just like the Dutch Republic, just like England, just like America, okay? It seems like a democracy. They call themselves a republic, but essentially controlled by private interests. Okay? All right. So because Venice has no resources, it has to engage in trade. And it's going to help set up a lot of trade networks throughout the Middle Ages. And what it's going to do that's very profitable is that it's going to import spices from East Asia back to Europe, okay? And this is going to make Venice very, very wealthy. So the two big cities are Genoa and Venice, okay? And as you can see, they are extremely energetic. They're going to set up trade networks throughout the world. This is a spice trade, and the center, of course, is in Venice. And this makes Venice the most wealthy city in Europe at some point. Okay, also remember what these small city-states do that's very effective is that they become parasites on the empire. Okay, so Venice can take its wealth and bribe imperial bureaucrats in Constantinople to give it trade preferences. Okay? And Venice will also set up alliances with also the Islamic Empire as well as the Mongols as well. Guess who is from Venice? Marco Polo is from Venice, okay? Why is Marco Polo traveling around the world? To set up new linkages for Venice, okay? So you got all these Venetians going around the world to be spies and to explore in order to set up new networks for Venice. Because they don't have really a choice in the matter. They are a trading power. They don't have any resources on their own, so the people have to be very energetic, okay? And while this is happening, they set up these banks where the wealthy merchants can pool their resources to take more risks. Okay? Eventually, what will happen is that Venice will decline and the Dutch Republic will emerge. What makes the Dutch Republic so powerful is that it's ruled by merchants who have now adopted Calvinism. Okay? Remember, Calvinism is the faith that wealth is signals that you will go to heaven. So everyone in the Dutch Republic works really, really hard. It's a very energetic society, and they can now feed off the Spanish Empire, okay, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburgs. Why? Because the Spanish Empire, what they've done is they've gone to South America and captured a lot of gold, and it makes their people very lazy. Okay? So there are three ways in which you can take advantage of that. The first, of course, is piracy, where your ships just steal the gold as this gold is heading back to Spain. Another is just by providing industry for these people. These people don't want to work, so you just sell them clothes, okay? And this builds up the industry of France, Britain, and the Dutch Republic. The last way, of course, is probably luxury goods, especially spices, to the market. So because the Spanish Empire is so wealthy, this wealth transfers to the energy industry of the Dutch Republic. Okay? And as you can see, this is what the trade looks like. The Dutch will set up a private company called the Dutch East Indies Company, which is almost like a nation unto itself. It becomes the world's wealthiest corporation even today. Okay? And the reason why it has a monopoly over the spice trade from the East Indies. It has its own army, it has its own currency, it has its own government, okay? It can enact its own laws in the regions it controls. All right, and as you can see, the Dutch are very energetic. So as a comparison, let's compare it to the Spanish Empire, okay? So at this point in history, the Spanish Empire is the wealthiest, most largest empire in the world. But as you can see, the Dutch are much more energetic, okay? The Dutch are much more industrious. And the British are actually much more industrious as well, okay? The reason why is the Spanish are still Catholic, whereas the Dutch Republic have turned into Protestants. Okay, and this allows for the growth of the middle class, because as long as you're willing to work hard, you can become wealthy. Whereas the Spanish, it's very much a society based on nobility and clerical privilege. Okay? All right. So as we discussed, the two leaders of the Protestant Reformation are Martin Luther, who proposed justification by faith. Okay, justification by faith. You have to actually believe in God if you want to access heaven. and John Calvin, who proposed the idea of double predestination, which means that God has already decided who's going to hell, who's going to heaven, and therefore you have to prove it to yourself by working really hard, making a lot of money, and not spending it, okay? And then all this money goes to the bank, which allows for the growth of the Dutch Republic. All right. The Protestant Reformation will have many major effects on the world. It will lead to something called the 30 Years' War, and the Protestants will fight the Catholics. And this will lead to the death of millions and millions of people. In fact, this is the deadliest war in Europe right before World War I. Okay? Yeah, the war is deadly. It lasts for a long time, 30 years. It will kill millions of people. Because of the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church is under attack. So what they decided to do is they decided to set up a secret society, basically an intelligence agency called the Jesuits. This is La Loyola. You may have heard of Loyola University. So they just go around the world, set up a lot of universities and schools. But their main mission is to infiltrate Protestant societies and try to overthrow the government and try to make them more Catholic, okay? In response, so this is the system of the Jesuits. Okay? And in response, the Protestants will set something called the Freemasons. Okay, we'll discuss this later on, right? But so throughout history, at this time, there's a secret battle going on between the Jesuits and the Freemasons. And they're using all sorts of really nefarious, evil techniques, including, as we discussed, traumatizing young children so they could be spies to infiltrate other groups. Okay? Because remember, at this point in history, people believe in God, so they're going to ask you, do you swear to God? And you have to, okay? And so you have to have secret identities if you are to pass their tests. Okay, so one of the crucial battlegrounds between the Jesuits and the Freemasons, the Protestants, is England. Okay, Henry VIII, what he will do is he will split off from the Pope because the Henry VIII, like most monarchs in Europe, they want to maintain their independence, their autonomy. When he dies, Queen Elizabeth I will inherit the throne, and at this point in history, there are a lot of Catholics who want to see her overthrown. So she launches this massive campaign to persecute Catholics. This will lead to many, many battles, crises between the Catholics and the Protestants. James II is a Catholic king, and the Protestant nobility don't want that. So what they will do is they'll conspire against him. In 1688, they will invite the Dutch aristocrat, William of Orange, into England to become the king. And this will lead to something called the Glorious Revolution, where now authority passes to Parliament. What Parliament will do is charge something called the Bank of England, which is, again, it's a private bank with the power of state. They can print money, okay? And this solves a huge problem because before, what happened is these private bankers would lend money to monarchs. The problem with that is the monarch could die, the monarch could be overthrown, the monarch could lose a war, the monarch could just decide not to pay you back, okay? But now, if it's Parliament that's borrowing the money, the people always have to pay you back, okay? Unless England is destroyed as a nation, your loan to the nation will always be guaranteed. And this is what will allow England to become an empire. So the great conflict between England and France, of course, is the Napoleonic Wars, where Napoleon is about to conquer Europe, and Britain cannot have that, okay? Britain is a naval power, and if Napoleon is able to establish an empire in Europe, then England won't be able to trade with Europe. So what England will do is finance 7 wars against Napoleon. And they can do that because they have the Bank of England, which is able to borrow unlimited amount of money from the future as well as across space, okay, across time and space. That's how they're able to defeat Napoleon. Napoleon defeated England 6 times. But England didn't really care because, first of all, England wasn't fighting the war, it was just financing the wars. And England could not stop fighting the wars because otherwise it would go bankrupt, okay? Does that make sense? All right, the Napoleonic Wars. And this establishes, of course, the British Empire. And they can do whatever they want now. So they take over India. And they set up something called the East India Company. Okay? And the East India Company is also a nation unto itself. It is at this time, as a company, maybe the third or fourth richest nation in the world. And of course, what they do that's very important is they extract wealth from India. They basically steal a lot of wealth from India. People estimate that they've stolen like $45 trillion of wealth from India. Okay, so you can see how in 1700, before the arrival of the East India Company, India might have like a quarter of the world's GDP, but over the next 200, 300 years, their wealth will plummet. Okay, the reason why is what's going to happen is that England will turn India into a resource colony. They will destroy the manufacturing base of India, turn it into an agricultural economy, and then force India to buy British manufactured goods. Okay? So what they will do is use India to drive their industrial revolution. Okay? And as you can see, they're also forcing the Indians to pay a lot more money than their own people. And so in 1913 to 1950, the average income of Indians don't really change that much. Okay? But what's really important for you to understand is this. The British could not have done this without help from the Indian people themselves. Okay? So what's happening is the British, for the Bank of England, they're able to co-opt the Indian elite. Why? Because now you're able to take your wealth and then store it in England. Okay? Does that make sense? Before, you couldn't really take your wealth anywhere, so your interests were aligned with the people. But now that you're able to take this wealth and then put it in England to be safe, your interests are now aligned with the British. And guess what, guys? The same strategy happened in China as well, where the Chinese local elites were helping the British establish opium trade networks throughout the country. That's why opium was able to spread so fast, okay? And guys, the system is still around today, okay? So the British Empire may be gone, but the British system of money laundering, of stealing a nation's resources by corrupting your elite, it still exists today, okay? So these are all places where England has these offshore private banks so that the elite of Africa, of Asia, can steal from the nation and store it in these banks, okay? All right, so England has some of the world's worst tax havens. All right, so what did England do with this money? Well, what England did was invest it in America. At this time, America is industrializing. And what's interesting about America is only a few individuals were able to monopolize entire industries. This is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he monopolized the railway industry. How did he do that? This is Andrew Carnegie, who was born poor, but then he monopolized America's steel industry. How did one person do that? That's really strange, guys. Oh, Rockefeller, he monopolized America's oil industry. In fact, over 6 weeks, he was able to buy out all his competitors. Where did he get all this money to buy out his competitors? How did he become a monopolist? How is this happening, guys? J.P. Morgan, he monopolizes America's financial industry, and he creates something called the Federal Reserve, which is a system they still have today, where America is ruled by private banks. Okay, how is this happening? All right, so these questions. How is it possible for these individuals to monopolize industries? Why are these monopolies national rather than regional? Okay, and why didn't government make public these critical infrastructure and resources like we do in China, right? Oil should belong to the people. Why does it belong to one person? The reason why is it is England that is using its wealth from India and China to finance these individuals and allow these individuals to build up entire industries. Why is it doing that? Because the Americans at this time in history, they hate the British, right? The Americans like, in 1776, we fought a revolution here with the British. Why would we allow the British come back and buy up our land and our oil and our steel and our railways, right? Therefore, they needed people like John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie to act as their agents. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? So in America, you're taught that these people, Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, they were just rags to riches. It's because of the American dream. It's a land of opportunity. If you work hard, you can become a billionaire. No, guys, that's not true, okay? If you belong to a secret society, if you are financed by the British Empire, you can become a billionaire. And guess what, guys? We have the same system today. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, really strange. This 19-year-old guy drops out from Harvard and founds Facebook, okay? And now he's a billionaire. How does that happen, guys? Well, it must be the American dream. Oh, ChatGPT, guys. Really strange. If you have a dream and you just follow it, you can become a billionaire in America. Yeah. It's all just a scam, right? Google, it's all just a scam, okay? What you need to understand about these companies is they were all founded with US military technology that is public, okay? The internet, it's a US military technology. Google, these search engines, it's all US military technology. And they were given to these guys for free. Why would they do that? Okay, again, if you think that we're ruled by secret societies, and it's really secret societies that control the world, and they want this technology out there to better surveil people, it makes a lot more sense, right? Because if the Pentagon said, hey, we have this free computer that you can use, you'd be like, I'm not going to use this computer because you'll spy on me, right? But if Mark Zuckerberg says, hey, free Facebook, guys, you want to use it? You're like, yeah, sure, Facebook, yeah. He's a dork from Harvard. Of course he can be trusted, right? Same strategy, okay, guys? All right, so 1913, these bankers met together to set up the Federal Reserve System. And this led to something called the Bretton Woods system in 1945. America won the war, and America promised the world that the US currency, backed by gold, will become the reserve currency of the world. But the US currency will always be backed by gold, therefore you have nothing to worry about, right? Well, in 1971, Richard Nixon says, screw that, okay? We're not backed by gold anymore. We're not backed by gold anymore. You can use it. You don't have to use it though, okay? But guess what? Oil will now be sold in US dollars. Okay, this is called the petrodollar. So if you want to buy oil, you have to use US dollars, okay? And then he did something else that was very important, and actually more important than linking the US dollar to oil. Can you guys guess what? Oh, this. Okay? Guess what? Millions of Chinese working really hard. It's all for useless US dollars, guys. Okay? All right. Okay, so America was founded by Ben Franklin and George Washington, among others. They were both members of the Freemasons. They were both members of secret societies. Okay? So America is really a Freemason country. And how do we know? Look at Washington, D.C., okay? Guess what, guys? The architecture, the city design, it's all secret society stuff, okay? This is a pentagram, and this is the White House, right? This is the White House. And you can see how it's designed. This is occult symbolism. This is another picture showing you that this is a Freemason symbol backed by the Pentagon. I'm sorry, the pentagram, okay? Okay? If you want to see more of the secret society's occult symbolism, just look at the US money. All right, this is the all-seeing eye, the pyramid. All the symbolism comes from Egypt, Greece, Babylon, okay? It's all part of the Freemason system. This is seal of the United States, the New World Order, okay? The New World Order. We'll be discussing this next week. Okay, but now you reach a point in history where you've got too much wealth, people become lazy and complacent. So what do you do with these peasants? We know exactly what they're going to do. They're going to destroy the economy like they did in 1929, and then they're going to start World War III. Okay? That's the goal. Because how the system works is, if you're transnational capital, you need people to constantly focus and working. Okay? And you do that by creating anxiety, by destroying wealth, by creating a cycle of constant death and destruction. All right? Any questions? Clear, guys? All right. So, great. So, next class, we will discuss the sign between Francus. Okay? All right.